Hello, I'm Stephen Scott Watson. I'm a technical policy expert with AI Policy Exchange. This short video is part of AI Policy Exchange's expert vlogging series and addresses the question, how can we put AI ethics into practice? The French philosopher Paul Virilio believed that technology cannot exist without the potential for accidents. For example, Virilio argued that the invention of the locomotive also contained the invention of derailment. He saw the accident as a negative growth of social positivism and scientific progress. In his 1999 book, The Politics of the Very Worst, Virilio said, "When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. Every technology carries its own negativity, which is invented at the same time as the technical progress." So if we consider Virilio's comments reasonable, and I personally do, it is self-evident that the creation of artificial intelligence will also come with the risk of bias. Erroneous, biased, or simply unsound outputs will counterbalance the undoubted positives that AI brings. This is the negativity being invented alongside AI, just as the plane and the ship examples were. This all represents a substantial risk, but I personally consider that all technology risk, once identified, can be managed. If, as a species, we can manage the risk of nuclear power, pandemics, we can surely mitigate the risks of AI. Only ignorance of risk is dangerous. The risk itself can be mitigated. I've personally spent the last 23 years working in technology risk control. My experience has shown me that risk is a permanent feature of the technology landscape. Risk is at one and the same time inevitable but manageable, but only so long as we're alive to the threats, and importantly, know where those threats come from. Aristotle claimed that there is no science of the accident, but Virilio disagreed, pointing to the growing credibility of simulators designed to escape an accident. He argued that simulation and avoidance was an industry that sprang from the union of post-World War II science and the military-industrial complex. Flight simulators, computer models, etc., all part of the accident control landscape. We take it as read that any new car released onto the market today will have been thoroughly crash tested first to determine its safety to passengers and to other road users. So why not AI? Why are we constantly seeing negative press about the unsafe nature of the output of this newest technology? Is no one testing AI for inherent ethical problems in the same way that cars and planes are tested for safety flaws? This begs the question as to what extent ethical objectives are actually implemented and embedded in the development and application of AI, or whether the industry as a whole is simply relying on good intentions. So far, some papers have been published on the subject of teaching ethics to data scientists, for example, Goldsmith and Burton in 2017. But in general, very little has been written about the tangible implementation of ethical goals and values in AI development. So far, most of the public debate around AI ethics seems to be coming from what we might term industry outsiders, i.e. people like myself who are not involved in developing AI but are commentating from the sidelines. Having said that, in fairness to the big tech companies that aren't completely tone deaf to the calls for ethical underpinning of the technology, several tech companies already offer tools for bias mitigation and fairness in machine learning. Google, Microsoft, and Facebook have issued things like AI Fairness 360 Toolkit, the What If Toolkit, Facets, Fairness Flow, etc. But a key question is, whose values are these? Who created the concept of fairness in play here, and who largely benefits from them? The cynical among you might even be thinking, aren't those just marketing strategies? Aren't they just fig leaves to cover the modesty of an industry that in reality doesn't want to be held back by ethical concerns? AI development is now moving at such a pace, it's a pace that wasn't previously anticipated. Virilio noted that the speed at which something happens may change its essential nature, and that which moves with speed quickly comes to dominate the area which is slower. We can probably class AI's development and application as the hare and the ethical control as the tortoise in this scenario. Virilio said something I believe is pertinent to global AI ethics debate generally. He said, "Whoever controls the territory possesses it. Possession of territory is not primarily about laws and contracts, but first and foremost a matter of movement and circulation." So who controls the territory of AI at present? technology is certainly moving and circulating quickly, but who possesses it? Is it the government, our government, a foreign government, Google, Microsoft, IBM? Who owns it? Who has possession of it? Just this week, this is mid-August 2020, the UK government has been embroiled in an uproar concerning the use of the UK Ministry of Education's allegedly biased algorithm in determining student pass grades. The public outcry in the UK became so loud that the UK government scrapped the output from the algorithm and reverted to the teachers' assessment marks. It's been a bad week for algorithms. It's another told you so example. The critics of AI will point to this one and say, once again, AI and algorithms has let us down. It has proven inherently biased. So, I hate to disagree with the great Aristotle regarding his view that there is no science of the accident, but I tend to agree with Virilio on that point, that there is a science of the accident. We can do something about this. But to manage the accident, we need to know where the causes of the accident are. So where do the risks of algorithmic bias, in the example of the UK schools, for example, come from? Perhaps they arise from the gaps in the current ethical guidelines. Recently, an important paper was written by Dr. Thilo Hagendorf of the University of Tübingen, The Ethics of AI Ethics, an evaluation of guidelines. It analyzes and compares 21 different AI ethical guidelines and highlights their overlaps and their omissions. As a result, he has been able to give a detailed overview of the current state of play in the field of AI ethics guidelines. Dr. Hagendorf concluded that currently, AI ethics is failing in many cases. Ethics lacks a reinforcement mechanism. Deviations from the various codes of ethics have no consequences. And in cases where ethics is integrated into institutions, it mainly serves as a marketing strategy. Furthermore, empirical experiments show that reading ethics guidelines has no significant influence on the decision-making of software developers. In practice, AI ethics is often considered as extraneous, as superfluous, as something of a kind of add-on to technical concerns, as an unbinding framework that is imposed from institutions outside of the technical community. My own view is that we are at a point similar to the one we were at the very beginning of the internet, when IT developers who were flushed with the excitement of the new technology ignored or just didn't consider the security risks, didn't see them as an issue when designing websites and new apps. My own experience in technology risk points to a repeated pattern in IT development of prizing speed of delivery over security. It seems to be in the DNA of IT development. I'm seeing that mindset in evidence again today, in the way that AI ethics is frequently viewed as an encumbrance and unnecessary brake on the pace of AI. It hasn't been helped by the ultra-competitive nature of the big players in AI. Google, Microsoft, IBM, I could name others, they all want to be the first to the summit. It's not an environment that is conducive to slow, measured judgment of areas such as ethical considerations. When the prize of victory is so great, the rush is on. It's a new gold rush, effectively. So returning to our original question, how can we put AI ethics into practice? Firstly, I don't believe that the prescriptive tick box guidelines are the answer. I've seen these controls circumvented and gamed by developers in the past. We need a deeper type of control rather than a tick box. These types of tick box controls generally start from the point of what must not be done. That's never a successful way of arriving at a good outcome. We need instead to move towards a situation-sensitive ethical approach based on values and with a clear view of what an ethical AI system looks like, not just what it isn't. In this way, putting AI ethics into practice won't come through imposing crude, overly generalized mechanisms which are designed to incorporate as many cases as possible under a set of generic principles. I'm always concerned when commentators on AI ethics refer to values and principles as if they're universal. They aren't. They vary from culture to culture and even within countries. My response is always, whose values, whose ethics? So I believe that we need to remember that opposing top-down tick box ethics principles will almost certainly fail, especially between cultures. So empowering AI developers to embed the right ethics for their culture and for the intended users of the AI is perhaps a novel idea, as it presupposes a variation in AI ethics from culture to culture. But why not? Remember when DVDs came in the description of the global area they've been created for, so you could see it was Zone 1, Zone 2, etc. Why can't we use a similar approach to AI ethics? Spell out who created the technology's ethical underpinning and for whose benefit it was created. And secondly, as those of the outsiders, myself included, i.e. not involved in the design and training of AI systems, we need closer links and more trust with the technical side of the AI world. It's not an easy task, but framing the discussions in a way that gives technical people a way into the whole nebulous area of ethics in a practical way, these are practical people, is paramount if the AI ethics debate is to take the key people along with it and avoid turning it into a virtuous echo chamber. We don't want AI outsiders talking about ethics in an echo chamber up to themselves with no actual leverage on the people who can make the AI systems. We need to get them involved. Finally, it's easier to make changes happen from within the key AI developers by convincing them of the need for internal challenge and provocative thought than through external preaching and scolding. We need ethical facilitators as catalysts in the world of AI ethics. We don't need more saintly oracles. So let's keep our discussions open. Let's keep them constructive at all times.